It's September 3rd, 2018, and it's time to review 5 of the most outrageous, infuriating, or just plain baffling things that have happened lately. It's your Facepalm 5. Let's count them down. Number 1, Republicans nominate racist, xenophobic, religious zealot to be governor of Florida. We Americans have a general election coming up in November, but before we get there, a few states still have to get their primaries out of the way. Last week, Florida held its primary, and Republican voters in the state nominated Congressman Ron DeSantis to run for governor. Let me tell you about him. He's a member of the Freedom Caucus, an outgrowth of the Tea Party movement and the most far-right group in the House of Representatives. He supports a total repeal of the Affordable Care Act and doesn't believe in universal health care or that health care is a right. He's ardently anti-immigrant. He has a history of associating with alt-right and Islamophobic organizations and spoke at last year's Restoration Weekend event alongside the likes of Milo Yiannopoulos, Steve Bannon, and Sebastian Gorka. He's against gun control, he's against the right to have an abortion, he's against same-sex marriage, he voted against reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, he supported the so-called First Amendment Defense Act, which sought to legalize discrimination under the guise of protecting religious liberty, and after the primary, which also saw the Democrats nominate Andrew Gillum, the mayor of Tallahassee, who also happens to be black, DeSantis went on Fox News and said that the last thing Florida needs to do is to monkey this up by electing Gillum to the governor's office. DeSantis' campaign communications director insists that DeSantis was talking about Gillum's socialist policies and that it's absurd to interpret it any other way. Right, because the anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, anti-woman, anti-LGBTQ candidate who has been endorsed by Trump and said that he was proud to speak at the same event as Milo Yiannopoulos and Steve Bannon would never, ever, ever stoop to blowing a racist dog whistle against his black opponent? Come on! Number 2, White House and right-wing pundits exploit woman's murder to demonize undocumented immigrants. Week before last, a man led police to the body of Molly Tibbetts, a University of Iowa student who had been missing since July 18. The man, who is apparently an undocumented immigrant, although his attorney disputes this, has been charged with first-degree murder. The Trump administration wasted no time in politicizing the murder of Molly Tibbetts. The day after her body was found, Trump tweeted a video statement declaring that Tibbetts had been permanently separated from her family, apparently a grotesque attempt at whataboutism in defense of his widely condemned zero-tolerance border policy. Trump also said in that statement, quote, "A person came in from Mexico illegally and killed her. We need the wall." I'm not going to stand here and defend the man who murdered Molly Tibbetts. He should have his day in court, and if he's convicted, he should be punished for murdering this young woman. Fuck him. But his immigration status had nothing to do with his crime. In fact, evidence, including the suspect's own statements to police, suggests that he abducted and murdered her because she rejected advances he made toward her. Violence against women is not caused by undocumented immigration. Plenty of people who were born in this country or came to this country through the official channels have been guilty of violence against women. Multiple studies have shown that immigrants, including the undocumented, commit violent crime at a lower than average rate. It is absolutely disgusting to see the President of the United States and his flunkies and apologists use the murder of this young woman to vilify an already maligned and marginalized group of people. One of those aforementioned apologists, conservative commentator Candace Owen, actually got into a Twitter argument with a member of Molly Tibbetts' family. The person who claimed to be a cousin of Tibbetts objected to Owens and others using her death to generalize a whole population based on some bad individuals and using Tibbetts' murder as political propaganda. Owens responded, "I find it strange that you have directed hate toward people that support the president, but you have not directed a single bad word toward the monster who committed this terrible crime." Is "you're not being hateful enough" really the sort of thing you want to be telling the family member of a murder victim right after they've called you out for politicizing the death of their loved one? Does the potential for self-reflection and apology and shame even exist for you? Or are you just that determined to carry water for Trump, no matter what he says and does, no matter how morally repugnant he is, or how harmful it is to other people, or debasing it is to you personally? Why am I asking redundant rhetorical questions? Shouldn't I just move on to the next segment? Number 3, Louis C.K. tests the waters for a comeback. Louis C.K., who has been out of the public eye since admitting last November to masturbating in front of multiple women without their consent, returned to comedy clubs in New York on August 25th. C.K. first took the stage at Governor's Comedy Club on Long Island, where he worked out some new material for about 10 to 15 minutes, according to TMZ. Later that night, he made an unannounced appearance at the Comedy Cellar in Manhattan, where he performed a short set for a mostly appreciative audience. Louis C.K. trying to sneak back into his stand-up career less than a year after admitting to multiple acts of sexual misconduct would be objectionable to many people, regardless of the content of his act upon his return. But the jokes he chose to tell from the stage at the Comedy Cellar certainly didn't help. According to multiple eyewitness accounts, one of the bits C.K. performed during his brief set was a consideration of the phrase "clean as a whistle," with C.K. observing that not all whistles are clean. Rape whistles, for example. And here's the thing that's troublesome about that. Back in November, Louis C.K. released what was, until his recent return to comedy clubs, his final public statement. In that statement, he admits that the stories about him jerking off in front of women without their consent were true, and he concludes by saying that he was going to step back and take a long time to listen. So he let 10 months go by and thought, yeah, it's been a long time, right? And during his 10 months of listening, he somehow got the impression that it was not only cool for him to come back, but to do a joke about fucking rape whistles on his first day. He took the stage at the Comedy Cellar without prior announcement. That means that those in the audience, and probably quite a few people who worked at the club who might have had a problem watching a man who admitted to multiple acts of sexual misconduct perform comedy a few feet away from them, were not given the opportunity to leave before he came out. Would a few minutes' notice from the management have been too much to ask? That way, people there who wanted to stick around could stick around, and those who had to leave could leave without having to walk out in the middle of the show. Just something simple like, hey folks, guess what? Louis C.K. just showed up, and he's coming out next. And he's gonna do a bit about a certain whistle-themed idiom, wherein he alludes to rape, because he's been listening. Number 4, Trump administration questions citizenship of Hispanic Americans. Last week, the Washington Post reported that the Trump administration has been denying passports to hundreds, perhaps thousands of Hispanic Americans who live near the southern border of the U.S. Why? Because the State Department doesn't believe they're American citizens. According to the Post, there have been court cases dating back to at least the 1990s involving birth attendants, midwives, and in some cases doctors who admitted to providing fraudulent documentation to the state in order to obtain American birth certificates for babies who were actually born in Mexico. So if such cases are known to exist, what's the problem? Well, for one thing, the midwives and doctors who helped parents obtain fraudulent birth certificates also delivered thousands of babies in the United States whose citizenship is completely legitimate. For another, because the birth certificates themselves were issued by the government of the state, Texas in most cases, it's impossible to determine whose citizenship is legitimate and whose isn't based solely on their documentation. And it's that documentation that people are required to provide when they apply for passports, which means that perhaps thousands of Americans are being denied passports simply because agents of the federal government suspect that their citizenship isn't genuine based on the part of the country where they were born. This practice wasn't originated by the Trump administration. As I said, cases of birth certificate fraud were being brought to courts in the 1990s and have involved people born as far back as the 1950s. The State Department denied passports to some people born near the U.S.-Mexico border during the George W. Bush administration. These denials continued into the first year of the Obama administration, when the ACLU reached a settlement with the State Department that effectively ended the practice until recently. The Post story notes that Trump has also recently renewed his public demands for restrictive voter ID laws, which would undoubtedly affect many of the same Americans who are now having difficulty obtaining passports. So let's review. Trump demonizes and grossly exaggerates problems related to undocumented immigrants, separates people apprehended crossing the border from their children, and puts them in concentration camps with no plan for ever reuniting them, seeks to drastically reduce the number of legal immigrants and refugees who enter the country, and now he's also questioning the citizenship of people born near the border, denying them passports based on suspicions that they might not have been born in this country. Where have we heard that before from Trump? And if he gets his way with voter ID laws, he might even deprive them of their right to vote. So, should we wait for Trump to give a speech outlining his final solution to the immigration question? Or should we remove the fascist fuck from office before it goes that far? And now it's time for the segment devoted to some of the other things said fascist fuck has done recently to disgrace the presidency and embarrass and or endanger the United States and the rest of the world. It's number 5, the further misadventures of Lord Dampnut. Please keep in mind, as always, the following is not a complete list. In an interview with Fox News, he falsely claimed that hush money payments arranged by his then attorney Michael Cohen didn't break campaign finance laws, and again denied knowing anything about the payments at the time, a claim that compelled the Washington Post to report for the first time ever that Trump had lied. Not said something false or misleading, but lied. That same day, Trump tweeted that Cohen had pled guilty to campaign finance violations that, quote, are not a crime. Oh, well, we'll just see. Trump also tweeted that he was ordering the Secretary of State to look into the large-scale killing of white farmers in South Africa, a conspiracy theory that has been promoted for years by white supremacists and is to date completely unsubstantiated. Speaking of conspiracy theories, Trump also posed for a photo in the Oval Office with Michael LeBron, also known as Lionel, one of the most prominent advocates for QAnon, the conspiracy theory that Trump is only pretending to be a bumbling, treasonous criminal in order to secretly combat the deep state and destroy an international child sex trafficking ring. And yes, there are people who seriously believe this. He accused Google of rigging its search results to only show bad news about him. Let me just pause there for a minute, and let's try to imagine the bottomless depths of this man's self-delusion. He's the President of the United States. He has bragged openly about sexually assaulting women on tape. He tried to ban Muslims from entering the country. He imposed a zero-tolerance border policy that resulted in hundreds of children being taken from their parents with no plan for ever reuniting them. He has imposed tariffs that have cost hundreds of thousands of American jobs. He lies on a daily basis, publicly. He is narcissistic, thin-skinned, painfully credulous, a babbling ignoramus with less self-control than many toddlers, and he thinks the reason that search results show so many unflattering stories about him is that Google is biased against him. Okay, let's carry on. He declared his administration's response to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico to be, quote, fantastic, despite the official death toll being raised to nearly 3,000, making Maria the deadliest hurricane to hit the U.S. since the Galveston hurricane of 1900. He claimed that his interview with NBC's Lester Holt last year, where he admitted to firing FBI Director James Comey because of the investigation into Russian collusion by his campaign, had been fudged, whatever the hell the inarticulate fuck even means by that. He tweeted that he's not sending the Secretary of State to North Korea because he's not seeing enough progress on denuclearization. Oh no, really? But Kim signed that press release and everything, and didn't he pinky swear or something? And After the death of Senator John McCain, whom Trump had previously insulted as not being a real war hero because he'd been captured, Trump balked at lowering the White House flag to half-staff and expressed his condolences to the McCain family on Instagram by posting a photo of himself. That's 5. Speak out, act out, resist. Look after each other. Hey folks, hope you got something out of this one. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, and also please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron of this channel for as little as $1 a month. And believe me, those $1 a month pledges really help me out. But if you can afford it, and you think I'm worth it, you can take advantage of some extra perks in the Patreon campaign when you pledge at a level of $5 a month or more, including getting yourself a shout out at the end of the Facepalm 5, just like these fine folks who have become my $5 or more per month patrons since the last Facepalm 5. Matthew Rick, thank you Matthew. Caroline Clark, thank you Caroline. Kyle Garrett, thank you Kyle. Brett Matthew Williams, thank you Brett. Anissa Kraft, thank you Anissa. Josa or Hosa, I'm not really sure how that's pronounced, I apologize, but thank you Josa or Hosa. Dom Smith, thank you Dom. And Steve Bradshaw, thank you Steve. Thanks to all of you, whether you are patrons at whatever level or whether you're not patrons but you're just viewers who watch the videos and like and share and subscribe and do all of the other free stuff. I appreciate your attention and your viewership and your support more than I can say. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.